4YG. 4YG. I remember. All the computers went crazy. They couldn't remember what day it was. They flipped back 100 years or 1,000 years, and the whole world fell apart, right?
That was Y2K, David, yeah.
Oh.
4YG, Y2K, it's...
4YG, 4YG. 4 years, period. 4 years, go. Why 4 years? Tell us about why 4YG. Explain it.
Well, I'd be delighted to. So, this is a global campaign called 4.Years.Go. It's 2 sentences, 3 words, a call to shift the trajectory of humanity on this planet. And the idea is that we're on an unsustainable path now. We're at a crisis point across many, many dimensions. This isn't just an environmental issue, although people often focus on those aspects, but it's also about social justice. It's about the kinds of lives that we lead, both in the industrialized world and in the less developed world, and the sense that if we don't change the direction we're on in a hurry, that we're going to cross thresholds, tipping points, beyond which we will not be able to recover very easily. So if we don't change course in the next 4 years, the next 1,000 might not be something we would like to live on.
So we're on an accelerating path towards some difficulties.
Right. An accelerating path towards a crisis, off a cliff. And I think people are familiar with a lot of the dimensions of that. And the idea is that there is also within this crisis an incredible opportunity for us to organize ourselves differently on this planet. We've figured out so many amazing things, not only technology, but also how to organize ourselves as people. We've evolved to the point where we're ready to be on this planet in a different way, to create a thriving, just, sustainable world for everyone on this planet. We could absolutely do that if we dedicate ourselves to it. So the call in this campaign is it's not coming out of fear. There's a crisis, there's urgency, but the call is not to act out of fear that something terrible is going to happen. It's to act out of opportunity and possibility for creating something truly new and remarkable.
There is hope. This is a way to turn things around so that hope, which I guess does spring eternal, we can use. Things won't be so that we all feel like all is lost by taking control of our own lives, taking control as a group, as a culture, as a nation, as a world.
I think you have to go to something deeper than hope. I think hope is where we're used to going.
Yeah.
You know, hope has kind of gotten us where we are now. That this is the way things have been, and we hope they'll change. But hope can easily shift into resignation, and I think resignation is at the core of why we haven't made this shift.
So this is more proactive than reactive.
It's about possibility. You know, most of us don't believe it's possible that we could have a world without poverty, that we could have a world without war, that we could have a world with 100% clean energy. They don't think that can happen, whether it's that we don't know how to do it or that the vested interests of the status quo are so powerful that we can't overcome them. There's this sense of either denial or resignation.
That mythical they.
Right.
They won't let it happen without knowing the conspiratorial element in all of us, that there are external forces outside.
That it's not about me. I'm not accountable. There's nothing I can do.
Right.
And the core of this campaign is to say that's not true. That's a story we tell ourselves about the way the world is. But the truth is, we are incredibly powerful. If we choose to create something, if we choose to create a new future for ourselves, it's just lying there waiting for us to do. And in fact, people all over the globe are already doing it. This is happening. And we see news headlines that are all about what isn't working and the crises of the day.
Yeah, that's the nature of news. Of course, the nature of news is to report on bad things, rather than good things.
But the truth is that there are millions and millions of people that are doing amazing things to shift the trajectory that we're on already. And if more and more of us summon the collective will to step into that place of possibility and say, you know what? I do believe we can create this world, and if we can, well, we need to do it, and we need to do it now because we're running out of time. If we don't stop some of the practices that we're engaged in, we're in big trouble. And those practices are stopping on their own anyway. They're not serving us. Our financial system is breaking down, our educational system, our healthcare system, our energy infrastructure, et cetera, et cetera. So we're being forced to find new ways to organize ourselves anyway.
And as you mentioned, crisis and opportunity, the crisis of those things happening kind of thrusts upon us a great opportunity, if you will, to make these changes.
It thrusts it on us. It's actually a sign. It's what happens when evolutionary shifts occur. The existing systems break down, and out of that chaos that you see, and you're in the midst of it, and you think nothing's happening, but out of that chaos is something new is born.
Sounds almost apocalyptic.
There are people that look at 2012 and say the world is going to end then.
Yeah.
And those of us that are engaged in this campaign say, well, maybe the world will end, but a new one's going to be born. Mm-hmm. And that's really what we're...
That's true. There is no vacuum. Something always takes the place. When something leaves, there's always something there to fill that void, to fill that vacuum.
Well, that's what's happened in America. I mean, the American people have retrenched from politics, and who's filled the vacuum? The people who are the few who are benefiting from our system now. So until the American people take a greater position, or into the political way of life in this country, mm-hmm. they're going to lose it. So that goes back to, I think, some of what you're saying. But I think of what you were saying. Before we went on, you mentioned the age of enlightenment, because if you look back at the American and French revolutions, those were the ideas of the age of reason and enlightenment put into action. And you saw the fruits of that in World War I when the monarchies were gone.
Yeah, by then
all the isms came in. Socialism, Marxism, mm-hmm. liberal democracy, republicanism. Those were all spawned during the 19th century for the most part. Right. And they came to, of course, when the monarchies collapsed, you going back to fill the void. What filled the void in a lot of those countries? The Bolsheviks, the Nazis, mm-hmm. the fascists, the Japanese militarists. I mean, they expected France to take up the sword to hold, as a guarantor of Versailles, and they weren't up to it. The United States was ostracized from Europe on its own accord. The Soviet Union was ostracized because of the fact they accepted godless communism, and yet they're the two countries, the United States and the Soviet Union, that finally ended what I call the European Civil War in 1945. So you see an evolutionary change here. Mm-hmm. So politics, which Europe was the center of politics in the world at the time, drift to the United States and the Soviet Union. Now, with the collapse of the Soviet Union, you're seeing a colonial power, India, come up. You're mm-hmm. seeing another power that was a subject of colonialism, China, coming up. Right. The world is changing, like you say.
Well, and the transition here that I think needs to happen, that we need to bring forth, is to step beyond the nation state. Not that countries go away.
That's interesting.
But that we realize it's one planet, we're one people. Those guys over there that we don't like, they're not going anywhere. There's nowhere else to go. The garbage we throw away, there is no away. We're stuck in this biosphere with the other creatures that we're, totally enmeshed in terms of our own survival. And if we don't start thinking on a planetary scale, we're acting on a planetary scale. The consequences of our economic actions, occur on a planetary scale now because of the exponential growth that's occurred in population and economic activity, et cetera. And the development of China and India are only accelerating that. So, not that states go away, but that we just recognize, blowing one another up is the height of ridiculousness, and we're just going to stop doing it.
So the common denominators are things. The common denominators for all of us are things that all affect us: energy, food, shelter. Those common denominators are the things we have to look at, rather than where you step from one country to another. Because there is no one country or another when it comes to energy. The energy is the same.
Carbon emitted in China is still going into the same atmosphere.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's a matter of who controls it too. I mean, this is if you can control the energy, you can control the world. So, there's a lot of attractiveness there to certain powers.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think we really, when you're in the middle of a transition like this, it's very hard to understand what the other side looks like. But one of the things, if you look at energy, and I think you see this is a meme, if you will, a pattern that occurs in lots of different areas. Decentralization, the dispersal of power. You have in the energy sector, it's what's the term for when you spread generation capacity around? You have lots and lots of small. Blanking on the exact term, but there's a notion that instead of having lots and lots of giant power plants,
right,
we can be generating energy from
more decentralized,
right?
The way you would be if you were using, say, wind turbines or solar energy,
right?
The energy gets created and turned to electricity right where you use it.
Well, and you also have the ability to move it around, but it's a much more resilient system, and it's a system where power literally is not concentrated in a few hands, and the same thing in terms of how we structure our governments is possible, so that it's not, and our economic activity, where increasingly we've seen a small number of actors that control everything. Right, it's contracted massively, and the alternative is to disperse it massively, and we have the ability now with, for example, all the possibilities of the internet and other kinds of technology to do that. And increasingly, I think we will be able to. That's one of the elements, I think, of what this transition can involve.
One of the great byproducts of all this, it seems like, is that ability to communicate freely over walls, around government restrictions, like China. We seem to be able to communicate a lot better than we used to. For those of us that are taking the time to think and listen and answer, that's not everybody, unfortunately. But
look at Egypt, right? It's the man in the street in the what used to be called the third world. We need a better term.
Yeah, it was kind of a derogatory term, but
it was
about elitist.
Anyway, so. The core of this campaign is that we call on individuals to take a stand and to become part of a community of people that say this new dream is possible. We can have a thriving, just, sustainable world for all, and we need to create it now. So I'm going to commit myself to doing everything I can, not to being part of some grand plan. The 4.Years.Go campaign isn't going to deliver marching orders to people,
right?
But it's going to give people a way to connect with other people that care, to cluster around the things that you care most about, to find organizations. There are over 1,200 organizations that are allied with the campaign now, and that number continues to grow. And it's just getting started.
Yeah, and you pick and choose the ones that are most dear to your heart.
And exactly, and I think where the really exciting potential starts to come is as people gather, you see possibilities for collaboration, for getting out of silos that we tend to operate in, and finding new ways to look at problems. And you mentioned politics and sort of the political void that we have now, and our democracy not working, and so people step into that, and I think to some extent that's another system that's just not working right now. Our old way of viewing politics, and the right and the left, and these arguments and battles we have. I mean, I'm way to the left on the political spectrum for sure, but I've talked to a guy in Wasilla, Alaska, who's a Tea Partier, who thinks all federal elections should be publicly funded.
That's a very widespread and well-respected concept.
They're as upset at the domination, of a narrow set of interests on what's happening in our government and our economy as people on the left are. And so I think we have to find new coalitions and again, start thinking as we, not us versus them. If we're in us versus them thinking, then we don't come together as a planet to make this change.
Well, I think that's what the powers that be want you to do. They want to drive that wedge. They want you to be left versus right, conservative versus liberal, black versus white.
Hey,
of course.
Look, I know better than anybody about that because I'm Irish, and I saw how the Irish Catholics and the Irish Protestants, the British, didn't want either one of them bothering the British, so what they did is they turned one against the other.
Right.
And it worked for a long time. It worked for a long time until finally they set aside that war and came together. Now Ireland is much better off, and they recognized that the troublemakers were really the British. And now that the British recognize that they recognize that, they can talk and negotiate in a more even-handed way.
And so I think in this case, who's the troublemaker? If we're all going to recognize our common humanity and come together, then we have to recognize that at some level, each one of us is the troublemaker.
Yeah, there's a troublemaker and there's a resolver in each one of us.
Exactly. And so you take a personal stand towards this new way of being, and you start taking ownership for the choices you make. And it goes back to that thing of expecting other people to fix the problems for us, right? As opposed to our being accountable, choosing to be accountable ourselves.
I got to throw one in there. We are the ones we've been waiting for.
That's right.
We are the solution.
Yeah. Be the change you wish to see in the world.
Absolutely.
As long as people are willing to break
great Chinese
out of
philosophy.
As long as people are willing to break out of that mold and not listen to what they're being told to do. And in fact, I've had conversations with David about this before. I'm to the point where I'm never going to vote for a Democrat or Republican above the rank of, for a local agenda. I'm just not gonna. I mean, why would I want to? They're all bought and sold by the corporate elite anyway. So why would I want to vote for somebody like from like Himes in the 4th Congressional District? Why would I want to vote for him for? I mean,
that's the great us and them in modern politics. Them is.
See, to me, it's just
corporate interests.
Our political system in its current structure isn't going to solve this. So to me, we kind of just go around and through it. That if enough people, I mean, this campaign literally the goal is 200 million people taking the 4-Years.Go stand by the end of 2014. That's global, and but it's starting primarily in the United States right now.
Yeah,
and we're expecting 1 million people by the end of this year. As those numbers grow, the politicians, will follow. They're not leaders in this kind of stuff.
Well, they're spineless.
They're totally. So we don't. We call them our leaders, followers. but they're the followers. And so I think when humanity comes together and says, sorry, we're doing it this way. Rather than acting through the existing political system that's totally broken.
Right.
I mean, I don't. Jim Himes is a nice guy. I've met him. I don't have anything against him.
And I think even too. But
and yeah, he's bought and paid for. Arguably, the politicians are bought and paid for. But
a lot of them are.
But some of them quite literally are. But I don't think
some
Jim
more
Himes
than others
is.
certainly.
I don't think he is. He worked at Goldman Sachs and he understands. He has a certain perspective from within the financial industry. Let's say. I mean, I worked at Drexel Burnham Lambert. So I just think we all operate within a certain context right now, and that's what most politicians are doing. They're operating within the context of the right and the left, and liberal and conservative, and a certain set of views that we need to transcend. And this is a different context. This context says, let's just grow up already. It's time for humanity to grow up.
But so then again, some of them are beyond growing up. They're going to have to go.
Oh, come on. You got to get as the Russians would say, get with the program.
Yeah, well.
Get with the program. Come on.
But rather than focusing our energy on fighting them, that just keeps us locked in the old thing. That gets us more of the same.
So rather than seeing the impediments in the way of, to use a little football parlance, rather than seeing the impediments in the way of the goal line, you focus on the goal line, wash out things that can get in your way, and go where you need to go to accomplish the goals you need to go.
Well, and recognize that there is a goal line there.
Yeah.
Because most people are, as I said before, they're in a state of denial or resignation. They don't think it's possible that we could have a different world than we do. They think we're just stuck. Or they think the best we can do is have incremental improvement, small scale change. We don't have time for small scale change. But the good news is we know how to do massive change when we want to. And again, I think Egypt, regardless of how that turns out in the near term, is just an inspiring example of how things can change very, very fast. You talked about a lot of different historical events. I mean, things can shift in a matter of years. It's happened over and over again.
And kind of amplifying what you're saying, it was interesting because some of the teachers and other union types that were involved in Wisconsin, it's interesting. There were. I was listening to a teacher that was being interviewed in Madison, and she was eating food sent to her from somebody from Egypt. And there was like a message with this food package saying, we're behind you from Egypt, And it's interesting, that people in Egypt would send Americans food when they're in this situation like this.
Well, and didn't Walker identify himself with Mubarak too?
Oh, yeah.
He
Well,
had some unfortunate comment.
Hosni Walker?
So there was some poetic justice.
Yeah, I guess there was.
Happened.
Yeah.
Well, then again, after 9/11, there were so many countries that reached out, and the same way that we've reached out in crises in other countries, they reached out to us. In fact, including our dear friends in Iran, who at that moment felt some compassion toward what had happened to people many thousands of miles away, and reached out and said, "Hey, we feel for you."
Yeah. Have you seen? There's a YouTube video, wonderful little piece, based on a talk by Jeremy Rifkin, a professor at Wharton, called "The Empathic Civilization."
Empathetic, yeah.
And it's about, he talks about our ability as human beings, how we're wired to be empathic to one another. That can be overridden by circumstance, so we can go to the baser instincts of
right.
Fight and flight. But we're social beings. Most mammals are, particularly the more the higher mammals, the more intelligent ones, and we want to be connected to one another. We want to be in community. Originally, it was tribal. But progressively we've expanded that. Then it became religious,
right.
and then it became the nation state that we aligned ourselves with. And Rifkin says, well, are we ready to embrace the entire globe? Why do we stop at the nation state? That didn't exist 300 years ago. It's invented by mankind. Same thing with all these different phases. So why should evolution societally stop at this particular point?
Now, we talked about the word tribal on the first show.
Right.
And I think if I'm correct, you can correct me if I'm not, that tribal is a more limited group with more in common than a nation would have. A nation is perhaps composed of many, many tribes with some connectivity to the other groups in the nation. And likewise, culturally, all English-speaking countries have
nations
something.
Were invented by we were way past tribe, but it was about it was a structure of control, really.
Right. Well, if once you get into tribes now, like let's say the Indian tribes here, you have the Cherokees, the Apaches, the Arapahoes, so on and so forth. Mm-hmm. They were all Indians and they were in tribes, but a lot of them were in competition with each other.
Sure.
War. They never really got together. There was no real Indian nationalism to offset the encroachment of the white man.
Yeah, there were groups that did band together.
Yeah, like the Blackfeet, the Crow, the Sioux, so on and so forth, and they wiped out Custer.
And you did have the Iroquois nation. Our Constitution is partly modeled on that.
Yeah.
So the word tribe, you can use it in different ways. When we talk about
Clan.
Native Americans, I think they had a more sophisticated civilization than the traditional tribal ones. But actually, this is kind of an interesting story with the 4.Years.Go campaign. The nonprofit that created it is called the Pachamama Alliance. Pachamama is a word that means the earth. Mm-hmm. In I think the language is Quechua, I think it might be called. It's
Quechua.
Comes out of the Andes region and the Amazon rainforest. And there's a particular people there, the Achuar, one of the few tribes, and they're really living in that traditional tribal unit, very, very small, villages spread throughout millions of pristine, acres of rainforest. So what we mean, by tribe when we think of how man lived for, lived 10,000 years ago, perhaps. And these people, very, very isolated, hardly anybody had ever had contact with them. They reached out to the west and to the north because they were having dreams. They base a lot of their decisions on the dreams of the elders. And the elders were all having dreams that there was a mortal danger to their community and that they would not be able to meet the challenge themselves. They had to ask the outside world for help. So they did. This man, John Perkins, met with them and they told him, we want to work with you. There's something going on. Well, it turned out to be this is Ecuador, famous for Texaco coming in and despoiling parts of the rainforest. Well, they were on their way to the land of the Achuar, and it was both mining and oil drilling that was set to just wipe these people out or take them off their land. And the Pachamama Alliance brought in a coalition that effectively fought them off. Ecuador now has the natural world has rights in its constitution, written into the constitution. Very, very progressive stuff happening there. The Achuar people's land is protected. And so all this, there's this incredible success, and they said to the Achuar, well, what do we do now? And they said, well, what you really have to do is change the dream of the North. So it's our dream. It's this world we live in that we think is reality, but it's really a nightmare. It's this unsustainable mess that we're creating. That has to change. That's what was going to destroy the Achuar, and it's going to destroy the whole planet if we don't convert. So here's this deep wisdom. I mean, you look at how these people live in harmony with their surroundings in the way that people have lived sustainably for thousands of years. And there's so much that we have to learn from them. We've dismissed them as primitive, but now we're coming to understand that, no. it's yes, they don't have the technology we have. They may be primitive in that sense.
So to be progressive in that sense, if you talk about progressivism, to be progressive does not necessarily require progress of a scientific or
high-tech nature?
Or a technical nature.
Right. Well, there's spiritual progress. There's I think we've evolved mentally. We don't do things now that we that we consider cruel and abhorrent, that were routine practices.
That's true.
A few hundred years ago.
That's true. Even with the atrocities that we've seen in life, and
of course we do still do those things.
Yeah, but it really isn't. We really are, as a planet, much more humane,
or at least we know we've figured out. Like it used to be, you abuse a child, you make him your slave. Nobody thought there was anything wrong with that. We still do it now, but we figured out that that's not a good way to raise your kids.
Even people that do it recognize that, or presumably recognize that what they're doing is wrong.
So I think there is an evolution of consciousness clearly in human history, and. So here's an interesting way to frame it. There's another, I mentioned the Jeremy Rifkin piece, another really interesting piece to look up is a presentation called Humanity 4.0.
We're going to have to break it off there. We've done our time. 30 minutes
to come
is up.
back for Humanity 4.0.
We'll have to come back to Humanity 4.0.
Just look for that on the web. But what you should really look for is 4YG.me and take the 4.Years.Go stand.
Excellent.
To make the dream of a
Take
thriving,
a look at it and see what you think. David Stevenson, Mark Albertson, Ben Roberts. Okay, good. Okay, you know me with names. That's why I call people by their own names. Congrats and soup. Good night.